My parents skipped my husband's funeral to meet a psychiatrist. Their plan made me shiver. My name is Marlene, and I am 32 years old. I stood alone at my husband's funeral scanning the pews for two faces that never appeared. My own parents. The people who raised me. The people who should have been holding my hand through the darkest day of my life. They were nowhere to be found. It was only later that I discovered where they had been, and the reason made my blood run cold. Before I share what happened, I would love to know where you are watching from today. Drop your location in the comments below. If this story resonates with you, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. What I am about to tell you will make you question everything you thought you knew about family loyalty. I met Derek at a technology conference in Seattle 7 years ago. He was standing by the coffee station, fumbling with one of those tiny sugar packets that never seemed to open properly. I walked over to grab a cup for myself, and he looked up at me with this embarrassed smile. "I have designed software that runs entire cities," he said, "but I cannot defeat this sugar packet." I laughed, took it from his hands, and tore it open for him. That was the beginning of everything. Derek was a senior software engineer at one of the biggest tech companies on the West Coast. He was brilliant in ways that still amazed me, even after years together. He could look at a problem that seemed impossible and find a solution that nobody else had considered. But what I loved most about him was not his intelligence. It was his kindness. He remembered the names of every server at our favorite restaurants. He spent weekends volunteering at coding camps for underprivileged kids. He never forgot an anniversary or a birthday, not once in 7 years. I worked as a freelance graphic designer, which meant I could work from anywhere. After we got engaged, we decided to build our life in Portland, Oregon. Derek loved the Pacific Northwest, the rain, the greenery, the mountains in the distance. We found a 2-story house in the suburbs with a small garden in the back. It was not a mansion, but it was ours. Every corner of that house held a memory. The kitchen where Derek would make his famous pancakes on Sunday mornings. The living room where we would curl up and watch movies until midnight. The bedroom where he would leave little sticky notes on my pillow telling me he loved me. We got married after 2 years of dating. The wedding was small, held in my grandmother's backyard, just close friends and family. Derek's parents had passed away when he was young, so he had no family of his own to invite. My parents were there, of course. My father, Richard, walked me down the aisle. My mother, Judith, cried during the vows. Everything seemed perfect. My parents lived about 40 minutes away from us. My father was a retired lawyer who had spent his career in estate planning and financial law. He was proud of what he called his strategic mind and his ability to see 10 steps ahead. My mother had been a high school teacher before she retired. She was quieter than my father, more subtle in her observations. She had a way of making comments that seemed innocent on the surface, but carried deeper meanings if you paid attention. Looking back now, I can see the warning signs that I missed. My father would ask Derek questions about his investments, his stock options at the company, his retirement plans. I thought he was just being a concerned father-in-law, making sure his daughter was financially secure. My mother would sometimes say things like, "Derek is so smart with money. You are lucky he handles all of that for you, Marlene." I never thought much of it. I trusted them completely. My younger sister, Colleen, lived in Los Angeles. She worked in the fashion industry, always busy with shows and shoots. Despite the distance, we stayed close. We would video call at least once a week, sharing everything about our lives. Colleen was 4 years younger than me, but sometimes she seemed wiser. I remember a conversation we had about a month before everything fell apart. Colleen looked uncomfortable on the screen, like she wanted to say something but was not sure how. "Marlene," she finally said, "have you noticed how much Mom and Dad ask about Derek's finances?" I shrugged. "They are just curious. They want to make sure we are doing okay." "It feels like more than curiosity," Colleen said. "Every time I talk to them, they ask me what Derek is earning, what kind of stock options he has, whether you have life insurance." "It is weird," I dismissed her concerns. "You are overthinking it. They are just being parents." Colleen did not push further, but I could see she was not convinced. I wish I had listened to her. The last morning I spent with Derek was like any other morning, and that is what makes it so painful to remember. He woke up early because he had a day trip to Seattle for work, some important meeting with a client that could not be rescheduled. I watched him get dressed from the bed, still half asleep. "I will be back before 7, he said, leaning down to kiss my forehead. "We can watch that new movie you have been wanting to see." I smiled and pulled him closer for a real kiss. Drive safe. He was at the door when he turned back one last time. His face was soft, full of love. I love you more than yesterday, he said. Less than tomorrow. That was the last thing he ever said to me. I spent the day working on a design project for a client. It was peaceful. I had no idea that my entire world was about to collapse. Around 4 in the afternoon, I took a break and started thinking about what to cook for dinner. Derek loved my chicken parmesan. I decided to surprise him with it. I had just finished setting out the ingredients when everything changed forever. The phone rang at 6 in the evening. I did not recognize the number, and for a moment, I almost did not answer. Something made me pick it up. Mrs. Marlene Harrison. The voice was professional, clinical. Yes, this is she. This is Providence Portland Medical Center. I am calling about your husband, Derek Harrison. My heart stopped. What happened? Is he okay? The pause before the answer lasted a lifetime. Mrs. Harrison, your husband was involved in a serious car accident on Interstate 5. A commercial truck lost control and struck his vehicle head-on. I could hear the words, but they did not make sense. They could not be real. He was transported to our emergency room, but I am very sorry to tell you that despite our best efforts, your husband did not survive. The phone slipped from my hand. I do not remember falling, but suddenly I was on the kitchen floor surrounded by the ingredients for a dinner that would never be made. The chicken parmesan he would never eat. The movie we would never watch. The tomorrow that would never come. I do not know how long I stayed on that floor. Eventually, I managed to pick up the phone and call my mother. Derek is dead, I said. The words felt foreign in my mouth. There was an accident. He is gone. My mother was silent for several seconds. When she spoke, her voice was calm. Too calm. We will be there soon, sweetheart. Just stay where you are. I expected her to cry, to gasp, to say something that matched the enormity of what I had just told her. But she sounded almost businesslike. At the time, I was too devastated to notice. My parents arrived at the hospital about an hour after I got there. I had somehow managed to drive myself, though I do not remember the journey. The doctors had already confirmed what I already knew. Derek was gone. My father walked in first. He looked at me, and then his eyes went somewhere else entirely. Have you spoken to anyone yet? He asked. The police, the insurance company. I stared at him. My husband was lying dead in a room down the hall, and my father was asking about insurance. Richard, my mother said softly, touching his arm. He seemed to catch himself. I am sorry, sweetheart. I am just trying to think of practical matters, so you do not have to. My mother hugged me, but there was something stiff about it. Her arms were around me, but I did not feel comforted. I felt cold. Over the next few days, my parents inserted themselves into every aspect of the arrangements. My father called the insurance company multiple times. He asked me for Derek's financial documents, claiming he wanted to help me get organized. My mother kept suggesting that I should come stay with them, that I was too fragile to be alone. I refused to leave our house. It was all I had left of Derek. His clothes still hung in the closet. His coffee mug still sat by the sink. I was not ready to leave that behind. My parents did not seem happy with my decision, but they did not push. Not then. 3 days after the accident, my best friend Tanya flew in from Chicago. She had been my college roommate, and she was the closest thing I had to a sister, besides Colleen. When she walked through my door and wrapped her arms around me, I finally let myself fall apart completely. Tanya stayed with me, sleeping in the guest room, making sure I ate, answering the phone calls I could not handle. She was a lifeline when I was drowning. But Tanya also noticed things that I was too broken to see. Marlene, she said one evening after my parents had left following another visit filled with questions about paperwork. Why do your parents keep asking about money? Derek just died. Should not they be asking how you are feeling? I defended them automatically. They are just trying to help. Dad is a lawyer. He thinks in terms of logistics. Tanya did not argue with me, but I saw the worry in her eyes. She did not trust them. I wish I had paid attention. The funeral was scheduled for 5 days after the accident. I spent those days in a fog, moving through the motions of planning a service for the man I loved, choosing the music Derek would have wanted, writing a eulogy that could never capture who he really was, selecting a casket that he would never see. The morning of the funeral, I called my mother. What time are you and Dad arriving? I could use some help setting up. "We will be there," she said. "Do not worry about anything." But when I got to the church, they were not there. I checked my phone, no messages. I called my father, no answer. I called my mother, no answer. The guests started arriving. Derek's colleagues from work, our neighbors, friends we had made over the years. Everyone was there except the two people who should have been by my side. Marcus, one of Derek's closest work friends, came up to me with red-rimmed eyes. He had known Derek for 8 years. They had started at the company together as junior engineers and had risen through the ranks side by side. Marcus hugged me tightly. "I am so sorry, Marlene. Derek was the best man I knew." I thanked him, but I kept looking toward the door. Where were my parents? The service began. I sat alone in the front pew. The seat beside me where my mother should have been sitting was empty. The seat next to that where my father should have been was empty too. Tanya slipped into the row behind me and put her hand on my shoulder. "I am right here," she whispered. The minister spoke about Derek's life, his kindness, his dedication. Then it was my turn to speak. I walked to the podium on shaking legs. The eulogy I had written was in my hands, but the words blurred through my tears. I looked out at the crowd of people who had loved my husband, and I saw the 2 empty seats in the front row. Derek used to say that love was not about grand gestures. I began, my voice cracking. It was about the small things. The cup of coffee made just the way you like it. The hand held during a scary movie. The note left on your pillow for no reason at all. I made it through the eulogy somehow. I do not know how. When I returned to my seat, I felt hollowed out like everything inside me had been scraped away. After the service, as people began to leave, my phone finally rang. It was my mother. "Sweetheart, we are so sorry. Something came up that we could not avoid." Something came up. I repeated, disbelief making my voice sharp. On the day of Derek's funeral, what could possibly be more important? My mother hesitated. "We will explain later. Just go home and rest. We love you." She hung up before I could say anything else. I stood there holding my phone, staring at the screen. My husband was dead. My parents had not come to his funeral, and they could not even tell me why. Tanya found me still standing there minutes later. She took one look at my face and led me to a pew where we sat together in the empty church. "They did not come," I said. "My own parents did not come to my husband's funeral." Tanya was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Marlene, something is very wrong here. Whatever kept them away, it was not normal. Normal parents do not miss their daughter's husband's funeral." I did not have the energy to argue. I did not have the energy for anything. That night, I lay alone in the bed I had shared with Derek. His side of the bed was cold. I reached over and touched his pillow, imagining I could still smell his shampoo. Then I curled into myself and cried until there was nothing left. 2 weeks passed. I moved through each day like a ghost, barely eating, barely sleeping. The investigation into the accident was closed. A truck driver had fallen asleep at the wheel. There was no one to blame, no one to punish. Derek was just gone. My parents called occasionally, but something had shifted between us. I could feel it every time we spoke. They asked how I was doing, but the questions felt hollow. What they really wanted to talk about was logistics. Had I filed the insurance claim? Had I contacted Derek's company about his stock options? Had I spoken to a financial advisor? Then Colleen called me from Los Angeles. "Marlene, I need to tell you something." Her voice was different, urgent. "I had dinner with Mom and Dad last week. They flew out here for some reason, would not tell me what. But they asked me a lot of questions about you." My stomach tightened. "What kind of questions?" "They wanted to know about your mental state. They kept asking if you seemed depressed, if you had mentioned hurting yourself, if you seemed like you could not take care of yourself." I frowned. "That is strange. I mean, of course I am sad. Derek just died, but I am not going crazy." "That is what worried me," Colleen said. And then I heard Dad mention a name. Dr. Brennan or something. A psychiatrist. It seemed like they had already talked to him. A chill ran down my spine. A psychiatrist. Why would they be talking to a psychiatrist about me? "I do not know," Colleen said. "But Marlene, I have a bad feeling about this. Be careful." After I hung up, I sat in silence for a long time. My parents were consulting a psychiatrist about my mental state. Without telling me, without asking me, I opened my laptop and searched for Dr. Harold Brennan, Psychiatrist, Portland. The results made my blood run cold. Dr. Harold Brennan specialized in forensic psychiatry. His website listed his areas of expertise: competency evaluations, guardianship assessments, legal capacity determinations. I stared at the screen, my hands trembling. I knew exactly what my parents were trying to do. They wanted to have me declared mentally incompetent. If they could prove that I was too unstable to manage my own affairs, they could petition for guardianship. And if they became my guardians, they would control everything: Derek's life insurance payout, his company stocks, our house, all of it. $3.2 million. That was Derek's legacy. The life insurance alone was $2 million. His stock options had vested just months before the accident, worth nearly $1 million. Our house was paid off. My husband had worked his entire career to build security for us for the family we were planning to start. And my parents wanted to steal it all. I called Tanya, barely able to get the words out. When I finished explaining, there was a long silence on the other end. "Marlene," she finally said, "you need a lawyer, right now." Victoria Ashford's office was on the 12th floor of a downtown Portland high-rise. She was a tall woman in her late 40s, with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. Tanya had found her through a colleague. She specialized in inheritance disputes and guardianship cases. I told her everything: the funeral my parents missed, Colleen's warning, Dr. Brennan and his specialty in competency evaluations. Victoria listened without interrupting. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair. "Unfortunately, what you are describing is not as uncommon as you might think. When significant money is involved, family members sometimes attempt to gain control through guardianship proceedings. The good news is that you clearly are competent. You are articulate, aware of your situation, and taking appropriate steps to protect yourself. So they cannot succeed. They should not succeed. But we need to be prepared. If your father has already consulted with a psychiatrist, he may be building a case. We need to build a stronger one." Victoria explained the strategy. First, I would undergo an independent psychiatric evaluation with a doctor she trusted. Dr. Sandra Whitfield was a respected psychiatrist who frequently served as an expert witness in these cases. Her assessment would carry significant weight. Second, Victoria would hire a private investigator to document my parents' activities. If they were meeting with Dr. Brennan and making claims about me, we needed proof. "There is one more thing," Victoria said. "Do you have anyone who can corroborate your father's unusual interest in your finances?" I thought of Marcus. Derek's best friend at work mentioned that someone had called the company asking about Derek's benefits. They did not provide information because I had not authorized it. "Get me that information," Victoria said. "Everything helps." I left her office feeling something I had not felt in weeks. Hope. Not happiness, not peace, but hope that I could fight back. That night, I sat in my living room and let myself really think about what my parents were doing. My mother and father, the people who had raised me, held me when I cried, cheered at my graduation, walked me down the aisle. Those people were trying to steal my husband's legacy. They had skipped his funeral to meet with a psychiatrist about how to take away my rights. I had trusted them completely. I had defended them to Tanya, to Colleen, to myself. And all along they had been planning this. The betrayal hurt almost as much as losing Derek. Almost. But I was not going to let them win. Leonard Howe was a retired police detective who had spent the past decade as a private investigator. He was in his early 50s, with gray hair and a weathered face that had seen too much. Victoria trusted him completely. I met with him the day after my consultation with Victoria. He listened to my story with the practiced patience of someone who had heard many similar tales. "Your father is a lawyer," Leonard observed. "He knows how these things work. He is being careful." "Can you find out what he is doing?" Leonard nodded. "I will start surveillance tomorrow. Credit card receipts, phone records. If we can get them legally, meetings, everything. If he is building a case against you, I will find the evidence." 2 weeks later, Leonard had his first report. My father had met with Dr. Brennan 3 times in the past month. The first meeting was on the day of Derek's funeral. The very hour I was standing alone at the podium, reading my husband's eulogy, my father was across town, in a psychiatrist's office, laying the groundwork for his scheme. Leonard had photographed them leaving the building together. My father shaking Dr. Brennan's hand. My mother beside him smiling. On the day of my husband's funeral, my mother was smiling outside a psychiatrist's office. I felt sick. Leonard continued his investigation. He discovered that my father had drafted preliminary paperwork for a guardianship petition. Dr. Brennan had written a preliminary assessment based entirely on information provided by my parents. The assessment described me as suffering from severe depression, with possible psychotic features, unable to make sound financial decisions, at risk of self-harm. None of it was true. Dr. Brennan had never met me, never spoken to me, never examined me. He had simply written what my father told him to write. While Leonard gathered external evidence, I reached out to Colleen. "I need your help," I told her. "I need you to record a conversation with Mom and Dad." Colleen did not hesitate. "Tell me what to do." A week later, she called me back with the recording. In the audio, my mother's voice was calm, almost soothing. "Your sister is not well, Colleen. She has been through such trauma. We are just trying to protect her." "Protect her from what?" Colleen asked. "From herself," my father answered. "That money is too much for someone in her condition to manage. She could be taken advantage of. She could make terrible decisions. We are her parents. It is our responsibility to step in. But have you talked to her about this? Does she know what you are planning?" There was a pause. Then my mother said, "Marlene does not understand what is best for her right now. When she is better, she will thank us." I listened to the recording 3 times. Each time the words cut deeper. My parents genuinely believed they were doing the right thing. They had convinced themselves that stealing my inheritance was an act of love. That made it even worse. I also contacted Marcus. He was happy to help in any way he could. "Your father called the company about a week after Derek passed," Marcus told me. "He said he was calling on your behalf, that you were too distraught to handle the paperwork. He wanted information about Derek's stock options and benefits." What did the company tell him? They refused. Company policy requires direct authorization from the beneficiary. When they asked for documentation, your father got agitated and hung up. Marcus had saved the email exchange. More evidence for Victoria's file. Dr. Sandra Whitfield's office was warm and inviting, nothing like the clinical coldness I had expected. She was a kind woman in her 60s, with silver hair and gentle eyes. Our evaluation took place over 2 sessions. She asked me about my marriage, about Derek's death, about my grief. She asked about my relationship with my parents, my work, my plans for the future. At the end of the 2nd session, she gave me her assessment. "Marlene, you are experiencing normal grief. The loss of a spouse is one of the most traumatic events a person can endure. Your sadness, your difficulty sleeping, your moments of feeling overwhelmed, all of this is completely normal and expected. And my competency? You are fully competent to manage your own affairs. You are articulate, insightful, and making appropriate decisions to protect yourself. I will submit my report to your attorney." I left her office feeling validated in a way I desperately needed. I was not crazy. I was not incompetent. I was a widow grieving her husband, and that was exactly what I was supposed to be. The summons arrived on a gray Tuesday morning. My father had officially filed for guardianship. I sat at my kitchen table reading the legal documents. The petition described me as gravely disabled due to mental illness. It claimed I was unable to provide for my own food, clothing, and shelter. It requested that Richard and Judith Harrison be appointed as my legal guardians, with full control over my financial affairs. Attached was Dr. Brennan's report. Reading his words about myself, a person he had never met, filled me with cold fury. I called Victoria. "They filed." "Good," she said. And I could hear the steel in her voice. "Now we fight back." The hearing was scheduled for 3 weeks later at the county courthouse. Victoria prepared meticulously. She organized all of our evidence. Leonard's surveillance photographs, the recorded conversation with my parents, the emails from Marcus, Dr. Whitfield's assessment, everything. The morning of the hearing, I dressed carefully. A simple black dress, minimal makeup. I looked like what I was, a grieving widow, a capable woman, not the broken creature my parents had described. Tanya came with me for support. Colleen had flown in from Los Angeles. They sat in the gallery behind me as I took my seat at the respondent's table beside Victoria. My parents entered the courtroom with their attorney. My father wore his best suit, the one he used to wear to important client meetings. My mother wore pearls. They looked confident. They looked like concerned parents trying to help their struggling daughter. They did not look at me. The hearing began with my father's attorney presenting the case for guardianship. He described me as a woman shattered by grief, unable to function, making erratic decisions. He submitted Dr. Brennan's report as evidence. Dr. Brennan took the stand. He was a portly man in his 50s with a smug expression that I immediately disliked. Dr. Brennan, my father's attorney, asked, "What is your professional assessment of Marlene Harrison's mental state? Based on the information provided to me by her parents, Mrs. Harrison is suffering from severe depression with psychotic features. She is unable to make sound financial decisions and may pose a risk to herself." "Thank you, Dr. Brennan." Then it was Victoria's turn. "Doctor Brennan," she began, her voice pleasant but sharp, "how many times have you met with my client, Marlene Harrison?" Dr. Brennan shifted uncomfortably. "I have not met with her directly. You have not met with her. So you wrote this assessment of her mental state without ever speaking to her, examining her, or evaluating her in any way. The information from her parents was quite detailed. Detailed enough to diagnose psychotic features without a single direct observation." Dr. Brennan's face reddened. "The symptoms described were consistent with what her parents told you," Victoria interrupted. "Parents who, as we will demonstrate, have significant financial motivation to have my client declared incompetent." Victoria submitted Dr. Whitfield's report. Then she called Dr. Whitfield to the stand. Dr. Whitfield testified about her 2 sessions with me. She described my grief as normal, my cognition as fully intact, my decision-making as appropriate and sound. "In your professional opinion," Victoria asked, "does Marlene Harrison require a guardian?" "Absolutely not. She is a competent adult who is navigating a difficult loss with appropriate coping mechanisms." Next, Victoria played Colleen's recording. The courtroom was silent as my mother's voice filled the room. "That money is too much for someone in her condition to manage." I watched my parents as they listened. My father's face remained impassive, but my mother's hand trembled slightly. Victoria submitted Marcus's email exchange, showing my father's attempts to access Derek's company benefits without authorization. She submitted Leonard's photographs of my parents meeting with Dr. Brennan on the day of the funeral. By the time Victoria finished presenting evidence, my parents' case had crumbled. The judge was an older woman with silver glasses and a stern expression. She looked at my parents for a long moment before speaking. "This court finds no credible evidence that Marlene Harrison lacks capacity to manage her own affairs. The petition for guardianship is denied." Relief flooded through me, but the judge was not finished. "Furthermore, this court is deeply troubled by the conduct of the petitioners. To seek guardianship of an adult child without genuine cause, motivated by apparent financial interest, is reprehensible. To engage a psychiatrist to write an assessment without ever examining the subject is a violation of professional ethics that will be referred to the appropriate licensing board." She looked directly at my father. "Mr. Harrison, you have disgraced your profession and betrayed your daughter. I suggest you reflect carefully on what you have done." The hearing was over. I stood up from the table. My parents remained seated, their faces pale. My father looked like he wanted to say something, but no words came. I turned and looked at them directly. The people who had raised me. The people who had tried to steal everything from me. I did not say anything. There was nothing left to say. I turned and walked out of the courtroom. Tanya and Colleen flanked me on either side. Behind me, I heard my mother call my name, but I did not look back. Outside, the sky was overcast, the same gray it had been when Derek died. But something inside me felt lighter. I was free. The weeks after the hearing were difficult in a different way. I had won, but victory felt hollow. I had lost my husband. And I had lost my parents not to death, but to their own greed. I did not contact them. They tried to call several times in the first few days, but I never answered. Eventually, the calls stopped. Colleen stayed with me for 2 weeks after the hearing. Having her there helped more than I could express. We talked about our childhood, trying to understand how our parents had become the people who would do this. "I think they always saw everything as transactions," Colleen said one night. "Love was conditional. Family was an investment. And when the potential payout was big enough, they could not resist." I thought about that for a long time. Maybe she was right. Maybe there had always been a coldness in them that I had refused to see. I started seeing a therapist. Not because I was incompetent, but because I needed help processing everything. The loss of Derek, the betrayal by my parents, the strange new shape of my life. My therapist helped me understand that I could grieve both losses separately. Derek's death was a tragedy. My parents' betrayal was a different kind of wound. I did not have to combine them or compare them. I could feel both pains and work through both journeys. I used some of Derek's life insurance to establish a foundation in his name. The Derek Harrison Memorial Scholarship Fund provides financial support to underprivileged students pursuing degrees in computer science. It was exactly the kind of thing Derek would have wanted. His legacy would live on in the young people who would go on to create things he would have loved. I returned to my graphic design work. Taking on projects gave me structure and purpose. I even started teaching a class at the local community college, sharing my skills with aspiring designers. Tanya visited often. Our friendship, already strong, became even deeper through everything we had been through together. She had believed in me when I could not believe in myself. I would never forget that. Marcus and I stayed in touch as well. We would meet for coffee sometimes and share memories of Derek. It was comforting to talk about my husband with someone who had known him as a colleague and a friend who could tell me stories I had never heard. 6 months after the hearing, I received a letter from my mother. It was long, full of explanations and justifications. She wrote about how worried they had been about me, how they had only wanted to help, how everything had been misunderstood. She did not apologize. Not once in 4 pages did she say she was sorry. I read the letter once, then I put it through the shredder. Dr. Brennan lost his medical license. The state medical board found that he had violated multiple ethical standards by writing an assessment of someone he had never examined. He tried to argue that he had been misled by my parents, but the board did not accept his excuses. My father's reputation in the legal community was damaged permanently. Word spread about what he had tried to do. His former colleagues looked at him differently. He had been respected once. Now he was a cautionary tale. I found myself thinking about forgiveness. Not because my parents deserved it, but because I needed to release the anger that was poisoning me. Holding on to hatred was like drinking poison and expecting someone else to die. I had heard that saying somewhere, and it kept coming back to me. Eventually, I reached a kind of peace. Not forgiveness exactly, but acceptance. My parents were who they were. They had made their choices, and those choices had consequence. I could not control what they had done, but I could control how I responded. I chose to move forward without them. I kept the house that Derek and I had shared. For a while, I thought about selling it, about starting fresh somewhere new, but every room held memories of him, and I was not ready to let those go. Maybe I never would be, and that was okay. I planted a garden in the backyard, the garden Derek and I had always talked about, but never gotten around to creating. Tomatoes, peppers, herbs. I found peace in the soil, in watching things grow. 1 year after Derek's death, I visited his grave. I brought flowers and sat on the grass beside the headstone. I made it, I told him. It was hard, but I made it. And I want you to know that I am going to be okay. I could almost hear his voice in my head. I never doubted it. I smiled through my tears. I love you more than yesterday, less than tomorrow. That was the truth. My love for Derek would never stop growing, even though he was gone. He had given me 7 years of happiness, and that was a gift I would carry forever. Now I want to ask you something. Have you ever had someone you trusted completely turn against you? Have you ever discovered that the people who should have protected you were actually the ones you needed protection from? I would love to hear your stories in the comments below. If this story touched you, please hit that like button. If you want to hear more stories about overcoming betrayal and finding strength, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you never miss an upload. And if you know someone who needs to hear that they can survive anything, please share this video with them. Thank you for watching. Thank you for being part of this community. Whatever you are going through, I want you to know that you are stronger than you think. Sometimes the people who should love us the most let us down the hardest, but that does not mean you are unworthy of love. It means you deserve better. Take care of yourselves, protect your hearts, and remember, you can always find your way home to a home you build for yourself. At our favorite restaurants. He spent weekends volunteering at coding camps for underprivileged kids. He never forgot an anniversary or a birthday, not once. In 7 years, I worked as a freelance graphic designer, which meant I could work from anywhere. After we got engaged, we decided to build our life. In Portland, Oregon, Derek loved the Pacific Northwest, the rain, the greenery, the mountains, and the distance. We found a 2-story house in the suburbs, with a small garden in the back. It was not a mansion, but it was ours. Every corner of that house held a memory. The kitchen where Derek would make his famous pancakes. On Sunday mornings. The living room where we would curl up and watch movies until midnight. The bedroom where he would leave little sticky notes. on my pillow telling me he loved me. We got married after 2 years of dating. The wedding was small, held in my grandmother's backyard, just close friends and family. Derek's parents had passed away when he was young, so he had no family of his own to invite. My parents were there, of course. My father, Richard, walked me down the aisle. My mother, Judith, cried during the vows. Everything seemed perfect. My parents lived about 40 minutes away from us. My father was a retired lawyer who had spent his career in estate planning and financial law. He was proud of what he called his strategic mind and his ability to see 10 steps ahead. My mother had been a high school teacher. Before she retired, she was quieter than my father, more subtle in her observations. She had a way of making comments that seemed innocent on the surface, but carried deeper meanings if you paid attention. Looking back now, I can see the warning signs that I missed. My father would ask Derek questions about his investments, his stock options at the company, his retirement plans. I thought he was just being a concerned father-in-law, making sure his daughter was financially secure. My mother would sometimes say things like, "Derek is so smart with money. You are lucky he handles all of that for you, Marlene." I never thought much of it. I trust them completely. My younger sister Colleen lived in Los Angeles. She worked in the fashion industry, always busy with shows and shoots. Despite the distance, we stayed close. We would video call at least once a week, sharing everything about our lives. Colleen was 4 years younger than me, but sometimes she seemed wiser. I remember a conversation we had about a month before everything fell apart. Colleen looked uncomfortable on the screen, like she wanted to say something but was not sure how. "Marlene," she finally said, "have you noticed how much Mom and Dad ask about Derek's finances?" I shrugged. "They are just curious. They want to make sure we are doing okay." "It feels like more than curiosity," Colleen said. "Every time I talk to them, they ask me what Derek is earning, what kind of stock options he has, whether you have life insurance. It is weird." I dismissed her concerns. "You are overthinking it. They are just being parents." Colleen did not push further, but I could see she was not convinced. I wish I had listened to her.